Welcome to the podcast. Who remembers Chann Pardesi? Yeah, the classic. It's a classic Punjabi film that if you're like me, you remember having it on video cassette, it being in the collection with all the other films from the 80s and the early 80s. Chann Pardesi changed the face of Punjabi cinema. It was the first film to ever win a National Film Award in India from Punjab. So it was huge. What it did for Punjabi cinema was massive. And guess what? They are remastering it. And the person behind that remastering process is our guest today. It's Simran Sidhu, whose family are so closely connected to this film. But I'll let him explain the story. Let's share the passion of this great piece of cinema and also this nice little moment in Punjabi culture. This is Simran Sidhu remastering Chann Pardesi for 2022 on the Tommy Sandhu podcast. When I heard that Chann Pardesi is being remade by Simran Sidhu, I just pictured Simran Sidhu to be like a 70-year-old Punjabi man, big daddy, who's going to I've got all this paisa and I'm going to invest it into this passion project of mine because why not? Now here you are, looking all young and modern. What's going on here, Simran? You probably weren't even alive when this film came out.
No, I was not alive. I'm not even close to it. Actually, when this film came out, it was my father, who was in Punjab University in Chandigarh. He had heard the story of Chann Pardesi, Mujabani, from Baldev Gill, who was in the theatre department at the time when my dad was studying zoology. And they were good friends. And Baldev Gill had actually gone to my father, Dr. Chann Sidhu, and he said, okay, look, do you have money? Could you maybe sell some land or something? We'd love to finance this film. And Dad was like, you're going to get me killed. Your parents have sent me here to study and they're going to say, you're wasting money on not just watching films, but making films. And I can't do that. But one thing I can do is I can write a letter to a friend who used to be here, who used to sing very well. He used to serenade his friends, but he's gone off to Film Institute Pune now to study filmmaking. And so he goes, I can write him a letter and see if he'd be interested in collaborating with you. That man's name was Manmohan Singh. So my dad ended up writing that letter, and Baldev Gill and Manmohan Singh, the legendary cinematographer of Yash Raj, did films like Mohabbatein and DDLJ, yeah, exactly. And then he came to Punjab in 2000 and he revived the Punjabi film industry in the post-militancy period, and we still use that model today, in the industry. So. And Baldev Gill and Manmohan Singh, their creative partnership subsists till this day. Their film PR is actually coming out the same day as this one. So it's kind of great that the same filmmakers have got two films coming out on the same day. And yeah, so that's kind of like how far back the relationships go. But my dad had left.
That tells you it's fate. That tells you this film was meant to be.
It feels like that because my dad had left them behind in the 70s and to come here to London and start his own life. And he just, he'd left it all behind. And then it wasn't until his son turned around and said, Dad, I don't want to, I was studying pharmacy at the time. I said, Dad, I do not want to be a pharmacist. It's a noble profession and everything, but that's not what I want to do. I'm a filmmaker. I have to make films. And Dad was, well, if you're serious about it, there's only one person I really know in the industry who's made it and whatever, and that's Manmohan Singh. So my dad got in touch with now Manmohan uncle, obviously I know him very well, and so he got in touch with him and said, I'm sorry, I've lost my son to your profession. I can see he's completely committed to it. What advice do you have to give? And he said, make sure your son gets a formal education in filmmaking from the best film school you can find. So I quit pharmacy and I went off to do get an LLB first, a bachelor's in law, because the course I wanted to apply to was at the London Film School, and it was a master's, an MA in filmmaking, and they said you need to have a bachelor's in something, more equivalent experience in the field. I was just a kid from Ilford, so I didn't have equivalent experience in the field. I was, I'll apply for law, and so I thought that could come in handy as well. So in my last year of law school, I applied to the London Film School. I went to interview. I was one of only, I think, this intake was a large intake of 30 people. Usually they only had 7 or 8, but they were increasing their intake. Out of those 30 people, I was one of, I think, maybe only 3 or 4 Brits. because they pride themselves on their internationalism. So I feel quite lucky that sort of I got in, and I got in on the strength of my screenwriting. Actually, it was my scripts that I presented to them, and they seemed to take a liking to it. And even while I was there, most of my work was, apart from crewing on other films, I was constantly script doctoring or helping people with their scripts and stuff. So that's something that it's like my bread and butter. Like I love writing, so that's, yeah.
And speaking of that, stories and plot lines, this as a story, Chann Pardesi as a story back then, even now, is pretty hard hitting, but that then it caused quite a bit of a stir. We cannot underestimate what a controversial, powerful, hard hitting, impact, movie landscape changing film this is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what happened was, so again, going back to the 70s, Baldev Gill, Manmohan Singh, Varyan Mast, who came up with the original idea of the premise, they took the film. My dad actually introduced them to the first distributor they ever had a meeting with. And the meeting asked them, the guy in the meeting, the distributor asked them, like, okay, so who are the stars in the film? And they were like, oh, Raj Babbar. And the distributor was like, who's that? And Amrish Puri, who's that? Om Puri. Don't know, so all of these people, Kulbhushan Kharbanda, they're all unknowns at the time. And he said, do you have Mir Mittal in the film? Who was, you couldn't make a film basically without Mir Mittal. He was the star, comedy actor. And they're like, no, we want to make a serious film, and they were like, well, then, your movie is not going to work. And so the Mir Mittal portion actually was written after the intermission. And because the rest of the film is quite dark, it's quite controversial. There are, quite, there are scenes that are quite challenging to grapple with. And actually, it's quite ahead of its time. When you look at it now, and you look at the Me Too movement, you look at sort of awareness of women's rights, you realize it's a story of something that probably happened shockingly often in our families going back to Punjab. Things like this probably happened quite a bit. But the perspective was never that. The woman was always objectified. Her story was always sidelined. With Chann Pardesi, the entire film takes place from Rama Vijay's perspective. So the trauma that's inflicted on her, we're seeing it all from a woman's perspective. So in that sense, it's quite a progressive, transgressive film, even by today's standards, I think.
Yeah, which is probably what led you to want to remaster this and reversion it and bring it up to date and out right now, because was that the driving thought behind, like, how this is still relevant? Or, like I said, it changed the face of Punjabi films. It was the first ever, as we know, to win a film award, a national film award, which is huge for Punjabi cinema, which we now know is massive. Punjabi cinema, Punjabi music, Punjabi culture dominates the planet. It can. And I speak to the rapper Divine, Divine and Nazy, Gully Boys, who have Gully Gang movement. And Divine himself said to me a couple of months ago, he said, no one can touch the Punjabi scene right now. For music, Punjabi rap, Punjabi scene, it's so strong. But a film like Chann Pardesi is kind of right at the very acorn of that. I mean, I'm sure you share the same sentiment in your own way.
I completely agree. And I actually think that Punjabi culture has been very central to subcontinental culture for a long time. Even going back to like ancient history, like, you can, the Vedas or the Ramayana, like all of these great texts from ancient times. Or if you go back historically, you look at the geographical locations, the Indus Valley civilization, like so much out of Punjab, and so many cultures have come through Punjab and have contributed to the richness. Chane don't come from India, nor does yogurt. All these things come from different parts of Dain and everything. That, so you can see the imprint.
Oh, but they go so well. They go so well.
Exactly. So I mean, but this is our language, our food, our culture, our music. The richness, elasticity of it is not because we keep things out. It's because everything comes in, and that richness of what we call now Punjabiyat. It's like, I think before America, we were the original melting pot of the world. Everybody, the Greeks, the Persians, everyone, they wanted to come here, the Chinese, the Mongols, we've had everyone here, And so that's a part of Punjabi culture, and Punjabi culture has dominated. You look at Bollywood movies, for example, even pre-1947, before partition, it was Lahore in Punjab that was the central industry that ended up shifting to Mumbai. So you end up having all of these Punjabi families and Punjabi sort of dynasties, basically. So shifting from Lahore to Mumbai and continuing that thing. And you can see the Punjabi influence everywhere. In terms of this film, how it came back specifically. So what happened is that, again, going back to film school, I was in film school. Me and my dad were sitting around and we were thinking, okay, I'm in film school. But what happens after film school? Because, there are so many people who go to film school and then, they can't make a go of it afterwards because it's a struggle. There's no clear career path to how to become a blockbuster film director, right? There's no one way to do that. And so we were sitting around and Dad was like, here's an idea. Why don't we call your Baldev uncle over for a few weeks? We'll chat, we'll bat around some ideas, figure out what to do. Maybe some interesting collaboration might come out of it. He is a champion screenwriter after all. He's our, Shakespeare. He's our Bill Goldman. So we invited Baldev uncle over to stay at our home for a few weeks. And literally on the car ride from Heathrow Airport to home, we were going around the M25. Dad's driving. Baldev uncle is in the side passenger seat. I'm sitting behind Baldev uncle, and we're just like chatting about films and stuff. At some point, Dad turns around to Baldev uncle, and he goes, "Yaar Baldev, what tusi Chann Pardesi da ki kar rahe hain?" And Baldev uncle kind of looked at Dad, sort of bemused and befuddled. He was like, "Sidhu sahab, karna ki hai? Purani filmein jo karni si kar liya, jo karna si kar liya, it's done." And I was like, "Je kite tusi wo film dobara liaunde cinema de vich." And the whole car just kind of fell quiet, And then Dad sort of turned to me, and I was sitting in the back. I was like, "Kyo Simran tenu ki lagda ho sakta ki nahi?" And I had just, and as soon as Dad said that, the gears were already turning in my head. And I had just seen Coppola's then, because he's done another remaster now, a 4K one. He'd done another remaster back in 2010, 2011 of The Godfather. And I'd seen that Coppola restoration, and it was beautiful. I'd seen it at the BFI. And I was like, I turned to Dad and I was like, Hollywood and other film cultures, they restore and remaster their films all the time, particularly their greats, their classics. I was like, Chann Pardesi is our godfather, It's like, I said, if we're going to put it back into cinemas, then the justification for it has to be that it's been restored and remastered and preserved for, hopefully hundreds of years, And so then Dad sort of batted that idea back to Baldev uncle and said, do you think it can happen? And he went quiet for a second. And then he said, "Sidhu Saab, I don't know anyone who has the will or the capacity to do something like this. Right. And so I think me and Dad, because we were very simpatico like that. Like, I think we'd already made up our minds, with company present, but we knew that this is we were going to do this, Right. And so then began a process of acquiring all of the rights. So we literally bought the film lock, stock and barrel. We had to go around several trips to Mumbai, traveling around in the heat and finding people. And there was one gentleman, Kewal Suri. I don't know if you've seen The Matrix Reloaded by any chance?
Yeah.
The scene with the key maker, and he's got all those keys around him. Mr. Kewal Suri is kind of like the Indian key maker, except instead of keys, he's got these
film reels
and videos he's over decades he's been accruing it, and he's like this diminutive gentleman, so sitting there at his desk, and he's just got all this stuff around him, and we pull up to his office in Mumbai, and he's sitting there like this, and he's like, "Okay, so what would you like?" He said, "We'd like to buy Chann Pardesi, all the rights that you have." He's like, "Theek hai, matlab, main thanu vech dunga, but what do you want it for?" He was just kind of like, "So we want to remaster it." And he was like, "Okay, all right, fine, So he didn't really fully understand what we were going for, but he knew. But I think we had a good sort of chemistry. I think he deep down felt that these people are up to something, and they might be up to something good, And he was very forthcoming, very generous, as was everyone that we approached. Really, this is all family money. We financed it ourselves, but in terms of actual help, everybody wanted to be involved. So, Manmohan Singh, the original cinematographer, came back and he supervised the DI color grade to make sure it looked exactly how he had pictured it in 1979. I know there have been remasters recently of other films like Sholay and stuff like that, but I would make the argument that they're not really true remasters. Sometimes they oversaturate it, or it doesn't really look. It doesn't. it doesn't do justice to the depth of that, 35mm, or in some cases 70.
Sometimes they can look a bit painting-esque, all of a sudden, like they've just been like graphically colored up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, so for example, like, if you're going to shoot a sky on 35mm film, I would argue is still a superior format. Like Christopher Nolan and the big Hollywood productions still shoot on 35mm, but they will scan to digital eventually anyway. But as a capture medium, 35mm film is extraordinary, and it has amazing depth. All of these films are shot on film. So something like Sholay, the depth of the sky, for example, you oversaturate it and it just becomes a block of blue. The depth is,
like The Simpsons.
You're right, like The Simpsons, exactly. So you don't, it becomes very garish, and you lose the original vision. We didn't want to do that with Chann Pardesi. So we brought Manmohan Singh back and said, make it the way you saw it in 1979, when it was shot. And he did, and it looks amazing. Like, I mean, literally, we did a premiere in Leicester, and people were saying they couldn't believe it was shot in 79. They were like, we could have sworn this was shot like in the 21st century. Like it's so it's pin sharp. I mean, that was one of the questions people asked was it hard to make it so sharp? And not really, because we have remastered the original negative. And even the negative has its own story, which is that, we were in Mumbai, we were buying bits piecemeal. The day we bought the rights for the original negative, we then actually went to the film archive, the National Film Archive in Pune. And, Baji, let me tell you, films from Indian history left unspooled to rot in the heat and the damp and the dark. It was a horror show. It was horrific. Like, as a film lover, it's kind of, it's kind of hurtful. It's very painful to visualize that. And luckily, because Chann Pardesi was a national award-winning film, it had been left in a corner, in a pile with the rubber seal still on it. It had accrued a degree of like fungal damage because moisture had creeped in between the reels. But it was fairly intact as compared to the other movies that were there. So we rescued the film, we took it out of there. We gave it to Film Lab in Mumbai, and they washed it with water. They took all of the reels, unspooled them, washed it with water, washed it with chemicals, and then they scanned it into high definition digital. And then they took all of the reels, and till today, we're still paying to keep them, refrigerated there. So to keep the film preserved. And then the scan was then worked on. So we took digibeta references where the fungal damage was too much. We used digibeta portions to reconstruct it. By the way, this is pretty much exactly how they restored and remastered The Godfather. So literally the respect and the level of attention to detail they gave to The Godfather, we brought that to Chann Pardesi. We really wanted to make sure this was a genuine remaster from the master negative. And then also Mr. J.S. Jima, who was one of the financiers on the original film, came back and did a 5.1 surround sound mix. And so the film now looks and sounds better than it ever has at any point in history. So
how amazing. How amazing. I mean, I'm trying to compare it to like, restoring an old Ferrari, but with, with all the original parts, but yet making it electric and kind of environmentally friendly. You've done all of that. And that's, and it sounds like already a painstaking process, but also obviously one of passion as well. How did the actors react? The ones, sadly, the ones who are still with us, sadly, some of them aren't no longer with us, but Raj Babbar, for example, what's his feedback been?
Raj Babbar, he saw the trailer, and I mean, I was heavily involved. I mean, I basically directed the trailer as well, because I wanted it to be a very specific type of trailer. And when he saw the trailer, he was blown away. He and my dad were talking for I think hours. He was just going on about, oh, it's amazing. And I think this film was very, very important to all of the people involved. It was very much their first film. It put everyone on the map. It redefined Punjabi cinema. It's one of the greatest, films ever made. I mean, that shot of Rama Vij in the sandstorm, I still don't quite know how. I think I asked him at one point, how did you do that? No one does that now. No one cares. It's just it's just, you stand 5 actors in a line and they're telling jokes for 5 minutes. And apparently that's cinema now. But this was a time when they literally created a sandstorm or however they did it. And because they're trying to visually convey something cinematically, that what this woman is going through. And so storytelling, visual storytelling, cinema was really important to all of the filmmakers. and to all of the actors. In terms of Raj Babbar, this is literally the first film he ever made. I mean, the shot where Raj Babbar steps into camera during his song with Rajni Sharma is the first, bit of footage he ever shot in his entire life. So it's an extremely important film for Raj Babbar. It's an extremely important film for everybody involved. It's very important for us. So, yeah.
Who do you want to come out? Who comes out then to this film? Is this a nostalgia piece for, my generation, probably a little bit older than me as well? I mean, how old are you? Do you mind me asking? Sorry, Sim.
Well, I'm 37 now, I think.
Right. Okay. So I'm 45. But I remember like this film and this era of films, I would have been 4 when it came out in 1980.
Right.
But obviously it kicks around on cassette in the house with my Amar Akbar Anthony's and other things, and Naseeb that was kicking around on cassette, which I'd go down to the suit shop with my mum. The suit shop would also be the video shop. And you'd get the videos, and my mum would talk materials. You'd be standing there for what felt like years.
Well, the off license. The off license that was also a video shop. That was my one. I was like,
My mum never went to the off license. Well, maybe she did, but just not when I was around. Not when she was on mother duties. Yeah. But in that respect, that whole time, that whole era. So I think, okay, my mum would want to watch this. My dad would definitely want to watch this. But is this? Are you trying to get? Hey, let's get your AP Dillon market. Let's get those 24, 25-year-old modern Punjabi listening, loving, culturally, aware kids into it as well.
Well, when George Lucas remastered and re-released Star Wars in 1997, before he made The Phantom Menace, it's amazing to think that there were a whole generation of kids who grew up having never really seen Star Wars in the cinema. They'd only ever seen it on videotape because their parents loved it, And I think Chann Pardesi has a similar kind of story within Punjabi families. There are a lot of people of our age who grew up with the videotape or with the VCD, and they've never seen it like this before, and they've never seen it on the big screen with big sound. And again, it's shot on large format, 35mm film. It's composed for that frame. There are some epic compositions like the Sandstorm composition, or it's incredible. It really needs to be seen in the cinema. So the way I think of it is, you spend $10 on a cinema ticket, right? Or maybe more if you go with a family. You don't know how good the movie is going to be. You don't have a clue, right? You just have to take a chance on that Friday or that Saturday. Is it any good? Word of mouth. Maybe someone likes it. Maybe someone doesn't like it. Maybe you don't like it. Whatever. Chann Pardesi is a film that is guaranteed that everyone's going to love it. Because I haven't met a single person yet who doesn't love the movie. The way I say it is, why go to the cinema to watch a Punjabi film when you can go to the cinema and watch the Punjabi film starring Raj Babbar, Amrish Puri, Om Puri, Prabhushan Kharbanda, actors who you've only ever seen speaking Hindi before, now speaking pitch perfect Thet Punjabi, that too written by Baldev Gill, who is like the Bill Goldman of the Punjabi film industry. You literally can't get better than that. The best cinematography by Manmohan Singh, Yash Raj. They basically invented 1980s and 1990s era of Bollywood cinema was kind of invented with Chann Pardesi, because this crew of people then shifts over to Mumbai and they start making those movies, and that aesthetic transitions over as well. So you're literally watching kind of like the Citizen Kane of modern Indian cinema in many ways. So why would you not want to see that on the big screen? Because let me tell you, once it leaves the cinema, it's gone, right? So this is your chance to see it. If you miss it, you miss out. This is your chance to watch it. And even if you've never seen it before, or you don't know what all the fuss is about, go and find out what all the fuss is about, because there's a very good chance you'll enjoy this film more than any other Punjabi film that you've seen for a while.
Amazing. It's almost like when people talk about, their Scarface, The Godfathers, the Star Wars, or those kind of just those epic films, must-see films, and a chance to watch it, like you say, remastered is so exciting. And you know what? I love your passion for it. And what's also so interesting is it shows the power of the film, that it's before your time. Okay, I get it. You're from a movie family and your dad and his circles, and it's around you and it's what you do. But the way it's got you just shows its kind of timelessness. But you're from Ilford. You're an Ilford boy, right? Are you still in Ilford now?
No, we just shifted last year to Romford.
Oh, okay, right.
We're near Romford in Hornchurch. So
I'm East Ham. I was East Ham born, and then went to school in Chadwell Heath, Ilford, and now in South Woodford. So I feel like when I say I know you, I know of the typical Asian male from our area wouldn't be into films with that level of passion you have. The fact that you're into movies the way you are, that's quite unique. That you're not into property or doing something else like that everybody else seems to be, doing, in East London. But you're a bit of a maverick in your own way. Clearly your dad is, clearly your uncles are in that respect. Here you are kind of with a little slice of them carrying it on for 2022.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, when you see the film, you'll see there's a card in the film that we've kept in from the original film. Our goal was, preserve and enhance. We didn't want to interfere. We just wanted to push it. And there's a card at the beginning of the film that says, "In memory of Balraj Sahni and his dream of good Punjabi cinema." And when those, at that time, all first-time filmmakers had never made a movie before, when they set out to make that film with no experience, they only had that goal in mind. We want to make good Punjabi cinema. And that very much is sort of our ethos as well. Now, in a way, I feel like we're kind of carrying on that thing of that dream of Balraj Sahni. And that's kind of, moving forward now in terms of, like you were saying, that filmmaking cause, that filmmaking leher, what are we going to do with that of Punjabi cinema? So, so one of the things that we are doing, we actually do have, we are developing a script for a sequel. I think I can actually probably show you this. That's the cover page.
Oh, how exciting. Look at that. You know what? I'm just saying, it almost feels a bit Godfather-esque. I don't know why. What is it? Is there something in the font? Or that all of a sudden
something in the font. I said, because I was trying to sort of like, we wanted to redesign the font, because at that time there was no actual logo. It was just like a standard block letters. And I was like, we need to create like a new logo for this thing. And I was always a huge fan of The Godfather, and I was trying to communicate to non-Punjabis who'd never seen it before sort of what the film was. I thought as like a visual shorthand, maybe we'll take some inspiration from the font of The Godfather, and so we used that. We modified it. I wanted to make it a little bit more blocky, a little bit more rustic. The Godfather is a bit more sort of sinuous, and instead of having sort of the puppeteering hands on top, instead on the word Chann, we've turned the sea into a crescent moon. Yeah. So, and that Chann Pardesi, it's a type of a poetry you can't even really translate it into English. It doesn't make sense. It's one of those things that, again, the richness of the Punjabi language, it's literally impossible to translate. I mean, you can approximate it, but it's Chann Pardesi is like, it's Chann Pardesi. So we never did an English translation of the title as well. We're like, that's what it is,
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm excited for you. I'm excited for the project. Outside, then, I was going to say outside of Chann Pardesi, what's going on for you? So, is it all eyes on Chann Pardesi Part 2 right now? Then,
yeah. So we're sort of. I mean, after this, we've had a very busy period. So, I've the whole family. I think we just want a bit of rest. I've just had my second child. My second child was born. Well, thank you very much. While we were releasing it, and
what is he or she called? Are they called? Are they named after any of the cast?
No, his name is Kabir, actually.
Oh, well, another man with an amazing voice.
Absolutely, yeah.
Him and Raj Babbar.
Yeah, although we actually named him after Bhagat Kabir.
Okay.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, Kabir it's a beautiful name, and I mean, I have a daughter as well. Her name is Anahat, and I always had this dream of, like, if I had two kids, I would like to give one of them a Sanskrit name and one of them an Arabic name. And so I get that now. So I've got Anahat and Kabir. So that would, because in the spirit of, Gurbani, there are so many languages in their cultures. Every name of God is accepted, because, we're all kind of, pulling in the same direction. That's the spirit of Punjabi, the right sort of mixing and enriching. And so, yeah, so I got to have a little bit of that, the naming of my children as well, which is nice.
Couple of quick questions have just come to me then before we wrap things up. It's just, okay, number one, let's start with this one because you've just touched upon. Is Punjab the ultimate melting pot? Is Punjab, well ahead of its time? And this is a very leading question if there ever was one, because clearly we share the same passion for it. But everything you're saying, and I've often believed this. I think Punjab is the patch that joins India and Pakistan. It's the plaster over this terrible crack in our culture and community and history. And I think it's down to Punjabis to mend anything that may have happened in the past. But the fact that you're saying all those people passed through it, Well, I'll let you, over to you, to how special is Punjab as a multicultural place on the planet and in history?
The more I learn about Punjab, the more proud I am to be a Punjabi. It's just, and I feel very lucky to have been born into this culture and to be able to represent it in some way. I'm extremely passionate about my Punjabiyat. The more I learn about it, so I mean, I've taught myself Punjabi just out of curiosity and passion. When I was a kid, I went to Punjabi school, didn't really care much about it, but in my adult years, I've really wanted to like connect with that, and so I've taught myself Gurmukhi, and I would love to one day write a script all in Gurmukhi Lipi all the way through in Thet Punjabi. That's the dream. Don't know if it'll ever happen. In terms of Punjabi history, look, you go back to let's look at the word India, for example, right? The word India is Greek, and the word translates as of the Indus, right? All 5 rivers of Punjab are of the Indus. Okay, this was the region that had fertile soils, had incredibly rich culture. It's the site of the Indus Valley civilization. Harappa is literally in modern day Chandigarh, for example. You look at the Bhagavad Gita was written by Vyas in just outside Rawalpindi. That's where the first Takshila is also in Rawalpindi, Punjab. The Vedas or Sare Matlab. They're all written on the riverbanks of the Indus Valley and the Punjab. The Ramayana was written by Bhagat Valmiki, whose ashram is literally like 10 kilometers from Amritsar, from Darbar Sahib. So you see all of this ancient history that we think of India as like the entire subcontinent, and it is, of course. But if we say that if we say India is our mother, then our grandmother is Punjab, because India was born in Punjab. I genuinely believe that. And even when we talk about people coming into India, most people were basically aiming for Punjab. That was the place that everyone settled there. The Greeks, the Mongols, the Persians, the original Aryans who invaded and migrated like 5,000 years ago. And that whole mixing and that churning and that kind of the culture that came out of that is why I think Punjab and Punjabi are so strong. And even with a geopolitical border running through it, I think there is still a great I always say that for the rest of India that likes to politicize it, for the rest of India, Punjab or like Pakistan and that whole partition period is just something hypothetical. But for Punjabis, and also for Bengalis as well, but for Punjabis, it's real. We lived it. This is part of our family history. Like my family originally comes from Lahore. My family literally, ran over the border, as I'm sure probably yours did at some point
yes,
too.
Did.
So
exactly the same.
This is for what everyone else is just a hypothetical political football, and they get riled up about it, even though they don't even know anyone from the area. This is our story. This is who we are. This is our history. This is why we're here, and the power of that region is immense. I was looking through a list of geopolitical hotspots around the world where World War III could potentially start from, and the India-Pakistan border, Punjab, was one of those hotspots. And to me, it just speaks to the power of that region, the power of Punjab, in terms of, the problem is there and the solution is also there, And I think that the more we start thinking in terms of pan-Punjabiism, it's going to benefit the entire subcontinent. Like you correctly said, it's the bridge in culture. It's like if you do dream of a union of the subcontinent, that union goes through Punjab. Yeah. There's no other way around it. Yeah. And so I feel that the stronger that Punjab is, the stronger that Punjabis are, the stronger that Punjabi culture and Punjabi language is. And I think the stronger that these things are, the stronger the subcontinent will be as a whole. Yeah. You look at the European Union, for example, Europe is a continent that had known nothing but war for thousands of years. But by unifying and sort of, beginning to talk, they've achieved incredible things. And I think that it's long overdue. The subcontinent needs to stop thinking in terms of confrontation, and they need to start thinking in terms of collaboration. And that collaboration, I genuinely believe, starts in Punjab.
Brilliant. I hope so. And I hope in my lifetime, I get to see that change that I think is so needed. Because as I said, if the problems kind of started from the line going through the Punjab, then maybe the solutions can start with Punjab coming back together.
And with Chann Pardesi. I mean,
yes,
Chann Pardesi is a pan-Punjabi film. You know, it goes to show that, like, you know, there are Pakistanis who, because unfortunately, we don't yet have a distribution deal in Pakistan. We're looking for it, but their infrastructure there is a little bit different. But we would love to release in Pakistan and our Punjabi brothers and sisters there to also share in this incredible piece of collective Punjabi history and culture. So yeah, that's the dream, you know.
And what's the future right now for Punjabi films? I mean, how's it going? Because we know there's a lot of comedy. We know we do comedy very well. We know we do music very well. We do kind of light very well. But are we missing something here? Because Chann Pardesi wasn't afraid to go in hard. Is there a lack of hard-hitting Punjabi films, and do Punjabi films need to get back to that?
You know what it is? It's always about the financial imperative. You see, you can never really rely on the system to change itself, because the system will always trend towards the status quo. It will always trend towards what's safe, what makes money. I think you need people who are a little bit crazy. I think I'm a little bit crazy, yeah. who will come in and try and change the structure. I mean, you know, for example, when Manmohan Singh came back in 2000 to start the industry, you know, there was no system, there was no structure. So everything he did was new at that time. And that created a system. And then people began doing things. But anytime you saw a shift, you know, it would settle into comedies, light films. But every time, like, for example, when Sadda Haq came along, Sadda Haq was an independent film. Sadda Haq came along and it changed the system for a while. Then, you know, Punjab 1980, and it culminates with Punjab 1984. So you can see then, you know, Hari Baveja made Char Sahebzade. That shook the industry up again. So, you know, you do have people like independent voices who sometimes poke through. And with Chann Pardesi, with the sequel that we're doing, that's one of the hopes, is that we want to kind of try and, you know, we're using the original Chann Pardesi as kind of like a mission statement to say, look what Punjabi cinema can be. Look what Punjabi cinema can do, and take that as basically a starting point, and then try and push even further and push it even higher. So that's the goal, that's the ambition. I would love to create a Punjabi film that is of an international standard, bringing my expertise, whatever I have from the London Film School. You know, I made a short film starring Yashwal Sharma about farmer suicides in Punjab. We won several international awards, including the 2018 Rummy Award for Best Dramatic Short Film. So I think we're on the right track, and we want to bring that level of quality and sort of that international mindset to Punjabi films. And I think, you know, you look at the landscape now, Iranian cinema, Korean cinema, like, they're making an international impact. They're winning Oscars and stuff like that. So I would love to see a scenario where Punjabi cinema begins to go more international and begins to, you know, perhaps gain a bit more, you know, a better reputation and sort of more respect around the world. That would be great. And to also keep entertaining domestic Punjabi audiences whose taste, I think, has really evolved very quickly. In the era of Netflix and Amazon Prime, you know, you've got people in the bin watching Squid Games. So yeah. How can you say that they only want to watch comedies? It's like, clearly there is a demand there that hasn't yet been tapped into. And hopefully, you know, we're going to endeavor to try and do something about that, try and create something significant.
Amazing. Well, listen, yeah, I think it feels like all the stars should be aligning for you. You've got the experience, you've got the connections, you've got the passion, clearly, and the love for it. So, mate, long may your career continue and succeed, and good luck with the Chann Pardesi too. It's been great talking to you, but this film is out now. By the time this podcast is out, it's out this weekend for the end of May. But in cinemas for how long? So how long does that run last for?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. In cinemas for how long? That's why you better run out and see it as soon as you can.
Okay.
Because the way the cinemas work is they kind of go like on a week-by-week basis. So they see how the film performs. If the film performs well this weekend, you know, we may get a second weekend. So, but as far as anyone's concerned, if you want to watch the film, this is the weekend you've got to go and see it. You know, right. You can't rely on a second or a third weekend. So if you want to see it, if you don't want to miss it, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, go watch it 27th of May, tomorrow or today.
Yes, now. Yesterday,
now. Just watch it now. Stop what you're doing, drop what you're doing, go watch it right now.
Take your mum and dad, take your uncles, take your family, take your kids, particularly if they're into films and movies and culture as well. This is great. Chann Pardesi, thank you. Oh, well, Simran Sidhu, thank you for all your work with Chann Pardesi, and good luck with everything. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.